The least you can say is these Confederate guys, they were morally questionable people in a system that was immoral, where they took part in it and took advantage of it, but they didn't reinstitute slavery.
Okay.
So if that's the case, if that's your framework you're working from, then this structure is on the chopping block.
Welcome, everybody, to Swords of Reason right here on the Speakeasy Show, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. This is where logic meets passion. If you're new here, the format is simple. Each debater gets 10 minutes for their opening statements, followed by a 5-minute uninterrupted rebuttal. After that, we enter the arena for a full hour of back and forth. This is where the arguments can clash. Iron sharpens the iron. Sorry, excuse me. And finally, each side delivers a 5-minute closing statement to lock in their case. When that's done, we move into the 30-minute Q&A. That'll drop actually, I already have the Q&A in the chat there for you. Just a reminder, Super Chats, PayPals, and Cash Apps, they will get priority. And if they fill up the whole 30 minutes, the free chat questions may not get answered. So if there's something you want guaranteed to be asked, make sure you send it through one of the priority options. Sorry. And finally, once the formal debate wraps up, we open the doors for the Chaos and Chill panel. This is where the community can hop in, challenge the debaters, ask follow-ups. That's if the debaters choose to stick around, because this part is optional for them, but it's always where things get wild. And today's debate prompt is controversial historical monuments should be preserved regardless of offense. And today's debaters on the affirmative, we welcome Mo Rebuttal, a debate connoisseur and the Goyim your rabbi warned you about, known for philosophical rigor and critical examination of ideas. Through online debates and post-debate breakdowns, he explores politics, government structures, public policy, culture, and moral frameworks. And his channel can be found in the description. And for the negative, we have Kieran Markin, familiar face in the open panel discussions, a professional panel derailer, known for frequent debate appearances and engaging in hot topic conversations. Right, and his channel also can be found in the description. With that being said, we are going to move into the openings. We're going to start with the affirmative. So, Mo, whenever you're ready for your opening statement, I will start the timer with your voice. And again, thank you both for being here.
Yeah, thank you. First off, thank you, Easy and crew, for putting this together, and Kieran for showing up. I really appreciate it. But let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow appreciators of the grand tapestry that is Western civilization, I'm here before you today with an unyielding pride of a man who cherishes the profound legacy of European art, philosophy, and the Christian faith that has shaped our world. From the marble masterpieces of Michelangelo to the brilliance of Socrates and Plato. From the cathedrals that pierce the heavens in testimony to God's glory, we are, in the West, we have built something extraordinary. It is this very heritage that compels me to affirm the resolution controversial historical monuments should be preserved, regardless the offense. Why, you may ask? Well, I'll tell you. Because to tear down these monuments is to wage war not just on stone and bronze, but on the soul of our civilization. Let's delve into the arguments. First, preservation serves a vital tool for historical education and moral reflection. These monuments, even those honoring those whose actions we now deem reprehensible, be it Confederate generals or colonial explorers, stand as tangible reminders of our past complexities. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths. Removing them erases history and sanitizes it, robbing future generations of the opportunity to learn and grow. Imagine if we demolished the Roman Colosseum because it was hosted gladiatorial bloodshed and was built by slaves. Would that not impoverish our understanding of human progress? Now, before we move forward, I would give you one of the clearest historical warnings of what happens when a society decides that offense is enough to tear down its monuments. Notre Dame. Notre Dame is not just a building. It's a medieval Gothic cathedral begun in the 1100s, standing at the heart of Paris, one of the greatest achievements of Western architecture and Christian civilization. Easy, if you could bring up the first picture for me, please. Take a moment to actually look at this. That is what culture looks like when it becomes real. That is faith, craftsmanship, and centuries of identity carved into stone. And here's the point in all this. During the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, Notre Dame was attacked, not because it was fragile, but because it was symbolic. The revolutionaries saw it as representing tradition, the church, and old social order. You can go ahead and take the picture down now, easy. And now listen carefully, because this is actually where it mirrors the United States today. The French Revolution began with rhetoric we recognize instantly. Inequality, resentment of privilege, anger at the wealthy, rage at institutions, the belief that society is fundamentally unjust and needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. Sound familiar? It should. That is the same emotional framework we hear today from progressive movements that insist the past is nothing but oppression, and that the solution is tearing down the symbols. And what did the French Revolution produce when that mindset came to power? A purge machine. During the Reign of Terror, thousands were executed, and being labeled an enemy of the revolution was enough to get you arrested and, in many cases, killed. Then they did something even more revealing. They didn't stop at politics. They attacked culture. They created the cult of reason, a state-run replacement for Christianity. Churches became targets. Symbols became enemies. And Notre Dame was stripped, repurposed, and treated like a tool for its revolutionary ideology instead of a sacred monument that it is. Go ahead and take a look at picture 2, please, Easy. Look at that. If they had succeeded in erasing Notre Dame completely, I would not even be able to talk to you about it today and use it as a warning. I wouldn't have this example, and I wouldn't be able to show you what nearly got destroyed when offense became policy. The loss would have been permanent, and we would be poor culturally and historically. You can go ahead and take it down now, easy. One of the more telling moments in all of this is the cathedral had statues called the Gallery of Kings. Revolutionaries believed these statues represented French kings, so they tore them down and they beheaded them, when in fact they were biblical figures. They didn't even know what they were destroying. This is what happens when outrage replaces knowledge. Notre Dame survived not because revolutionaries respected it, but because it was too valuable to level immediately. It was repurposed and used as a practical building. And what did the revolution ultimately bring France? Not stable freedom, not utopia. It collapsed into instability and eventually produced Napoleon, another form of centralized authority. So Notre Dame stands today as a living warning. Once a movement decides that offense justifies destruction, it doesn't just remove statues, it attacks the culture itself. And that's the question this debate demands. Does offense justify removal? Were the revolutionaries right to attack Notre Dame? Would they be right to go further? Second point, these monuments are integral to our cultural identity and heritage, a cornerstone of Western pride. Europe and the broader West have produced unparalleled achievements in governance, art, philosophy, often intertwined with controversial histories. The statues of Christopher Columbus, for instance, the flawed man that he was, embody the spirit of exploration and imperial drive to spread Western values across the globe, laying foundations for modern liberties. To remove them in the name of offense is to succumb to the radical, left-leaning cancel culture that despises tradition and seeks to rewrite history through erasure. This is not progress. It's cultural vandalism akin to the Taliban's destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas. I reject this. Our monuments are symbols of resilience, reminding us that the Western system, rule of law, individual rights, emerged from trial and error, not utopia. Third point. Preservation upholds the principles of free speech, which are hallmarks of Western society. Offense is subjective and fleeting. What offends one group today may honor another tomorrow. By allowing monuments to stand, we foster debate and dialogue, echoing the Socratic method that birthed Western philosophy. Censoring them sets a dangerous precedent, a slippery slope where offense becomes the arbiter of truth. Today, it's a statue of a slaveholder. Tomorrow, it's George Washington for his impact on the Native Americans, or even Churchill for his colonial policies. I view this as a threat to the marketplace of ideas, the freedom to seek and speak truth. Because truth isn't created by comfort, it's tested by challenge. When we start removing public symbols simply because they offend, we replace debate with intimidation. We should preserve these controversial statues so we can confront it openly, not bow to emotional tyranny. So, in summary, premise 1, monuments educate on history's full spectrum, promoting growth and preventing repetition of errors. Very important. Premise 2, they safeguard the cultural heritage, defending Western achievements against destructive ideologies that undermine tradition. Premise 3, preservation defends free expression, averting a slippery slope towards censorship. So in conclusion, we must preserve controversial historical monuments, regardless of offense. For they are the guardians of our Western soul, imperfect, yes, but essential to our identity, faith, and future. To do otherwise is to betray the very civilization that illuminated the world. I can see the rest of my time.
Thank you for that opening statement, Mo. And with that, we are going to hand the mic over to Kieran for your opening statement. Kieran, whenever you're ready for your opening statement, go ahead and jump in, and I'll start the timer up with your voice.
Thank you, sir. I'll begin by saying that my opening will be as thoughtful, but not as dramatic as Mo's. I was impressed greatly. Okay. So to begin with, I think that neither my opponent nor I will be able to point to an objective moral standard in making our arguments, which I think he wasn't doing that there, by the way. So I think we're on the same page. We'll most likely be dealing with cultural, social, and political issues for which there are often no clear-cut answers. But rather we'll have a teasing out of perspectives in the hope that a difference of opinion can be clarified and explored through the course of the debate. I'm going to argue that historical monuments have a complex role in society, both historically and in the present. Furthermore, I'll argue that the concept of offence can be a reasonable starting point for questioning the utility of some historical monuments, and that there can be contexts in which it is appropriate to have a monument removed and or replaced. Having said that, I'll lay out my perspective on the main aspects of the prompt, namely the purpose of historical monuments and the nature of offence. I think it's fair to say historical monuments serve two primary purposes. The first is to tie the present to the past. Having monuments in prominent places reminds us of our heritage and the foundations of our town, our state, our country, even our football club. Often those heritages are complicated and even have many dark periods, and so statues of prominent figures remind us of the good and the bad from which our society has developed. These monuments can serve another purpose also, that is to express the values held by the community in the present. For example, statues of the founding fathers of the US represent the values of freedom, the rule of law, etc., that those founders codified in the American Constitution. They stand as a reminder of the complex and fraught process by which the current values of the USA were established politically. In that sense, they play an important role in the perpetuation of those values. In addressing the second aspect of the prompt, this dual nature of the role of the monuments will be where the controversy arises. Let's talk about offence. What is it? Well, like many things, we can approach it at a surface level, or we can look at it at a deeper level. The British media personality Stephen Fry once commented that saying "I'm offended by that" is just another way of saying I don't like what you're saying and I want you to stop saying it. To which his response was something along the lines of, I don't care. And in many cases, I believe that is an appropriate response. However, in the modern age, this view of the notion of offence is often used to dismiss an opponent's concerns out of hand. And I think we can lose something important when we automatically treat it that way. Sometimes a person may have a valid concern or issue, but they don't have a well-developed critique to offer yet. Saying I'm offended, although it's often seen as cringeworthy today, can be a way to start a conversation about opposing perspectives through which nuance and genuine intellectual growth can be teased out. I'll offer an example. Let's say a public school has the 10 Commandments from the Christian Bible presented on a plaque at the entrance to the school, and an atheist student claims to be offended by that. If the powers to be are willing to engage with the student and inquire about his concerns, a very important discussion could arise about the role of government-funded education systems and whether they have the right or authority to display a religious plaque. This discussion could go all the way to the highest court of the land for the issue to be addressed there. So the concept of offence can be a trite complaint about something someone doesn't like, or it could be the catalyst for important political discussions if treated conscientiously by both sides. So why would someone or a group of people be offended by a historical monument? And what should be done about it? There are several reasons that come to mind. The statue may no longer represent the values that the people would like to perpetuate, or it may be that more is learned about the person whom the statue represents, and this new knowledge changes the way that people feel about that historical figure. A third reason emerges when we consider when, why, and by whom a statue is commissioned and authorised in the first place. Important monuments have been erected many times in the past as part of a political campaign to enforce certain cultural values into the future. Is it wrong for people, upon discovering this, wanting to rectify the situation by removing the statues? I don't think so. I'll present and contrast a couple of examples to demonstrate the nuanced nature of the issue. I'll begin with the statue of Edward Colston that was pulled down in the city of Bristol in the UK in 2020. Colston was a businessman, a politician, and a philanthropist. He supported many charities during his lifetime in the 18th century and even bequeathed much of his wealth to charity upon his death. However, he was also a slave trader, a member of the Royal African Company nonetheless. He even spent a year as deputy governor of that company. The Royal African Company was responsible for transporting around 80,000 slaves during the horrific era of the transatlantic slave trades. Is it reasonable for the people of Bristol, upon hearing more about his life, to change their minds about wanting to venerate him in such a public way as having his statue in a prominent place in the city? Is it reasonable that they may feel this statue does not represent the values that they now hold? I think that's reasonable. Now here, I must address that the statue was torn down by BLM activists and pushed into a river in 2020. I think that is the wrong way to go about it. However, I could see an argument that it was reasonable to rethink his position of veneration in a public space. His statue was retrieved and is now on display in a history museum where information about the totality of his life, both good and bad, can be accessed. That seems to me to be an appropriate course of action in this case. Contrast that with another example. There are many statues of Thomas Jefferson in very prominent places in the United States. Jefferson also owned slaves in his lifetime. Some people, on learning of his slave ownership, might also get offended and call for the removal of his statues. These can look like similar cases on face value. Both are prominent men of their time. Both are historically significant, and among other things, both owned slaves. But there's just one little thing called the Bill of Rights, for which Jefferson is often considered the primary author. Jefferson was instrumental in the legal ban on slavery in the USA. In both examples, we can weigh up the good and the bad and see which way the scales tilt. We can also ask ourselves in what way a statue of either man represents and perpetuates the values held by people in these towns in the present. I would argue that in considering the totality of the lives and activities of both men, it's reasonable to remove the statue of Colston and keep the statue of Jefferson. This is not an arbitrary claim. It's a reasoned response to the claim that some statues are offensive, followed by genuine inquiry into the lives and times of both men. Public debate, political input, and historical investigation can all be drawn upon to ensure that the prominent monuments in a town, state, or country sit well within that society at the time. I want to address one last point. That is the notion of erasing history. It's sometimes claimed, as my opponent has, that that is what we are doing when we remove or replace historical monuments. However, in the case of the Colston statue, which I mentioned earlier, that ended up in a museum. The net result was that a more detailed understanding of history was produced and preserved. So to sum up my position, historical monuments are part of an evolving society, and their relevance or significance can change as the values of the society change and as more information is learned about the origins of those monuments. I see no reason why there shouldn't be a mechanism for removing or replacing a particular monument if it no longer fits into the society in which it stands. That mechanism could be summed up as follows. Someone says, I'm offended by that statue, and someone else asks why. If that complaint is received in good faith and investigated, some surprising results may arise. It may be discovered the statue did not represent what the people thought it represented, or it may be found out that it was erected initially as part of a political campaign to rewrite history. A consensus might be reached that a particular space, such as a town square, would be better served by a different statue that more accurately represents the history and the current values of that town or state. And therefore, I claim that there are times when it is appropriate to remove a monument, and the reasons for that will sometimes be prompted by the notion that it offends some people. Thank you for the opportunity to present that.
All right. Thank you for that opening statement. And with that, we are going to get into the 5 minute of uninterrupted rebuttals. So this is 5 minutes each debater gets to directly respond to their opponent's openings. It's not a back and forth yet, so no interjections. And then when your 5 minutes are up, we move to the other side, and then we'll get into the open hour. So moving back to Mo. Mo, whenever you are ready for your 5 minute uninterrupted rebuttal, I will start the timer up with your voice.
So I was listening to the opening statement, and I was trying to follow the logic here, but I really didn't hear too many arguments. The only argument that I heard was if a rule that if enough people are offended, then we can remove it. That's not, you're admitting that basically the standard isn't truth or history or education. It's essentially mob pressure. My opponent did mention in his opening to examine these things and allow people to question it. That's fine. Go ahead. I encourage that. I even think that's healthy because that's what they're there for. They spark debate and conversation over who these people were, what they represented at the time, what the culture was at the time that thought it was a good thing to erect these things. He also talked about building things as kind of a political statement, and that being a negative. Well, under that standard, you have to take a look at the Colosseum. The Colosseum, like many things, was built post-events for political messaging, such as glorifying emperors after long conquest. So under his standard, I would have a few questions. If enough offense is the test, what principle stops loud groups from censoring anything they don't like? If we remove historical displays whenever it causes discomfort, how do students learn to live in a society that contains beliefs they disagree with? And with that, I'll concede the rest of my time because I want to get into this.
All right. Thank you for that rebuttal. And we're going to hand the mic back to Kieran. Kieran, whenever you're ready for your 5 minutes of uninterrupted rebuttal, I'll start the timer up with your voice. Oh, you're muted on the stream yet.
Of course. Somebody has to at some point.
Right.
Yeah. Mo, I think my main critique of your statement was that it was a very it was like a blanket statement. This idea that if people are protesting monuments and whatever, then I think you said they'll tear down everything, and you did point to certain phenomena such as during the French Revolution, etc. But my argument against that is that we're actually we can do it in some measure. So you're going with tear down everything. Now, if we're going to resist that, that means that we resist everything, which means that nothing changes. So you're pitting up, your argument would pit two sides against each other. The one that wants to tear down everything and the one that doesn't want to change anything. That sounds like calcification of a society. Now, when you talk about free speech, yeah, sure. You don't put it in a museum and talk about it. Or you can teach it in schools. You can have debates about why a monument was moved and taken down because the society has evolved. None of what I'm saying will eradicate the ability to still discuss and talk and speak with free speech about these topics. In fact, having this hardball this hardball line that you can never move a monument, you can't take it down. That sounds more like a restriction on free speech, and you see that happen. That's what happens is you end up with, violence and anger and frustration. So what I'm promoting is a mechanism to deal with it, not just ignoring it. So that's where I think my main contention is with your position. And with that, I'm happy to move on.
All right. Thank you both for those rebuttals. Great rebuttals from both sides. Before we move into the open hour of back and forth, let me talk to the audience real quick. If you're watching right now, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and subscribe to tonight's debaters. Their links are in the description, and we host all kinds of debates here on Swords of Reason. Politics, culture, ethics, internet topics, anything where reasoning and passion can collide. So if you enjoy the format, make sure you stay locked in because we've got a lot more coming. And also a reminder for the live chat after the closing statements, we'll be doing a 30-minute Q&A. So I've dropped the Q&A there in the chat for you guys to put your questions in. But remember, the super chats, PayPals, and Cash Apps, these will get priority, and if they fill up the whole 30 minutes, we may not get to those questions. So if there's something you really want answered, send it through one of the priority options. And finally, thank you to both of our debaters for being here tonight and bringing your perspectives into the arena. And whenever one of you is ready to start the open floor exchange, just jump in and I'll start the timer up with your voice.
Yeah. Here. You mentioned a few things. So in your rebuttal, you talked about taking some of these monuments and putting them in like a museum where they can be better appreciated and still discussed and that sort of thing. Is that?
Sure. Yeah.
And you think that is an approach that is valid?
That's why I said it.
Okay. What would you call it?
Was valid. That was a strange
what would you call that, Kieran, when you take a monument and put it into a museum?
Just tell me what you're thinking instead of asking me these questions.
Would that be preserving it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You're still asking me questions. Why aren't you telling me what you think?
Well, that's kind of the debate, isn't it?
No, you're trying to lead me to say what you want me to say. Just tell me what you think, and I'll respond.
No, you've already said it. You said you would put them in a museum. Do you think they put them in a museum in order to destroy them, or do you think they put them in a museum to preserve them, Kieran?
What do you think? I'll ask you a question.
I think they preserve them.
Okay, and I agree. They put them there.
So you think they? Okay. So let me. Okay. Another part.
I will respond to that. I think part of the concept.
Go ahead.
What I'm saying is when we say preserving monuments, preserving them where they are in their current position, say in the middle of town square, is part of the issue. Well, I think you kind of conceded the debate there, but let's continue on a little bit here. How do I concede? Even if you went down that, hang on, you made a claim. You reckon I conceded the debate? Tell me.
Well, can you read the topic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But can you understand nuance? Can you understand nuance?
I can understand you are okay with preserving monuments as long as they're relocated. But I'll even argue that that's not a very good idea either, because here's the problem with that. You're actually just kicking the can down the road, Kieran, because the next thing that happens is...
Do you think the prominence of the statue is at all a factor?
Well, I'll get to that. If you take the statues and you put them, I want to reply to this. If you take the statues and you put them in the museum, the next challenge is going to be: do museums have infinite landscape in order to put these things on display, or do they have a limited amount of space? So the next argument you're kicking down the road is going to be, well, we don't want this statue in the main hall. We want it to be in the back. We don't want, we want this one to not really be there. It's going to just take another form of argument where these left-wing people come in and say, no, we don't like it here. We want to move somewhere else in the museum. So you're not actually solving anything in the end.
Then say no there.
So why say no there and not at the beginning where it should stay where it's...
Would you agree that the prominence of a historical monument is a factor? Is there a difference
prominence?
in the example I gave with the Colston statue being in the middle of the town square? That the fact it's in the town square is actually relevant, or
It is relevant. Yes, it's historically relevant.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah,
So
you can't. If we take Stonehenge and we uproot it and put it in a park somewhere in New York, it's going to lose a bit of its mystique and its significance.
Correct.
Can't get around that.
Correct. So the position of the statue is part of preserving the historical statue is preserving it in its location.
I would argue that it's very important for them to be where they are at. Yes, so they leave them where they are geographically.
That's the point I'm making. So you agree preserving them in. You tried to tell me if I put them in a museum, we're preserving them, therefore you win. But you just conceded keeping them where they are is part of the preservation.
I said that it's tied to their historical importance.
Yeah. So preserving them where they are is important.
Right, but you're still preserving them in a museum.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. Great.
I can concede that without losing
then let me. Okay, so let me just make sure, because I want to kind of steelman your position here. I want to make sure that I understand it. So let's take the Confederate statues, for instance, right? Okay. Big talking point.
Yeah.
Do you think that the reason why the Confederate statues are subject to being taken down is because they're tied to slavery? Is that would you say that's an accurate statement?
Could be part of it, but there's more
part of it. Okay, but would you say that's like the main reason that a lot of people?
No.
What are the reasons would there be?
Because most of the Confederate statues that were put up in around 1900 and the couple of decades before and after were part of a campaign to rewrite the history.
Okay, but that campaign was to invoke what?
Hey,
what was that? What was that supposed to invoke? Was that to kind of remind people,
to rewrite history? You look up the sort of work of the UDC. You're familiar with the United Daughters of the Confederacy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who funded and had a full campaign through the schools, primary school, high school, and to.
But the case you brought up actually had to do with slavery, for the one that in Australia you mentioned, right? So that was the one that was. So that was the reason why it was taken down, or they wanted to take it down.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is troublesome because I'm worried where that logic eventually takes you. Because that means any group who finds a reason they dislike, they can basically just take whatever they want down.
Were you listening to I gave a counter example where two people who both own slaves, right? And I said that through reasoning we could take one down and leave the other there.
Okay, but so my point is the statue that you mentioned was taken down because of slavery, right?
Yeah, sure, because of the scale. Okay. Because of the scale.
Sure.
Of it.
Okay, the scale of it. Okay, great. So the scale, so like someone who has, I guess you could say, a more egregious offense involving slavery would mark them for potential discussion of removing the statue.
Correct. And also someone who did something as significant as write the Bill of Rights probably has a higher scale on for being preserved.
Okay. Do you know? Well, so like I said, I'm worried like that logic where it can lead. So I'll give you an example, like the Arc de Triomphe. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah,
you've been there. Beautiful. Okay, so the Arc de.
I've also been to Notre Dame. It's pretty dull or dim inside. I've got to say, it doesn't look the way it does in your photos. It's still a beautiful building, but it doesn't look quite like that.
But anyway, I think actually, speaking, can you bring up that picture? I sent you a chat just to bring up the one, just to show the audience what it looks like for people who haven't been there.
The second one?
Sure. The first one.
Oh, okay.
Of the two new I sent you.
Oh, you sent new ones. Sorry.
Yeah, I sent new ones. Yeah.
Yep. Give me a second here. And here we go.
Yeah, so the Arc de Triomphe is in Paris. It was commissioned in 1806. The construction is inspired by the arches of ancient Rome, built throughout the empire. It's a really big part of French history, big tourist attraction. So if someone decided, for instance, like they hated Napoleon, they didn't like him.
Sure.
Would you be okay with them taking down the structure?
No.
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 Are you sure? What if they really didn't like Napoleon?
Yeah, still no.
Okay. Kieran, Napoleon reinstated slavery in the French colonies in 1802 after it was already abolished.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about egregious framework here, the least you can say is these Confederate guys, they were morally questionable people in a system that was immoral, where they took part in it and took advantage of it, but they didn't reinstitute slavery.
Okay.
So if that's the case, if that's your framework you're working from, then this structure is on the chopping block, and you have no grounds to say otherwise.
Just for clarity, and I hope you know the answer, because I don't. What does the arc of triumph actually represent? What's it?
It was a glorification of Napoleon. It also has quite a few. Actually, let me see here. It was built after a campaign, successful campaign. There's quite a few structures on it. One is the departure of volunteers. It was a winged figure screaming forward, calling citizens, soldiers to defend the France. Another one was.
So it wasn't a monument to Napoleon. It was about French.
So do the monuments that you had taken down, does it have like a guy choking out a slave or something on it?
No, I'm talking about your claim.
Okay.
Now. Talking about your claim, you said if someone didn't like Napoleon, they could tear down the Arc de Triomphe.
Right.
I'm asking, is it a statue of Napoleon? Is it dedicated to Napoleon?
It is Napoleon, yes. It's dedicated. I wasn't finished, but yes, it was dedicated to Napoleon, yes. Yes, he commissioned it.
Fair enough. He commissioned it.
There's also the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Space that is a very big part of that. It's beautiful, constructed by giant slabs of limestone. Beneath it has like I said, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It's honoring unidentified soldiers who were killed in World War I. It symbolically represents all who died for France and were never identified. There's also an eternal flame there to that's always lit. But you would, under your logic, since the egregiousness goes on, how much part you have in slavery, we should be able to tear down this.
No, I said the egregiousness in general. In those examples we were speaking about, yes.
Did any of those men institute slavery? Did any of those men come to power and say, you know what, you guys didn't have slavery, but you know what, I like slavery. I'm going to introduce this again. I want this. It wasn't even abolished in France until like 100 years later because of that.
Yeah, so?
What do you mean so?
You literally asked me if this was all about slavery, and I said no. And now you're stuck on slavery.
No. I asked you if what was the metric, and you said the level of egregious nature for the person that it represents. We literally have a man who instituted slavery when it didn't exist prior, and but you're going to be okay with all these other statues men who took part in slavery. I would say a guy who actually had the power and instituted slavery has a lot more of an egregious offense in history compared to the other two.
Good for you.
Can you give a counter argument?
Is that an argument?
It is an argument.
Well, it's not my argument. My argument is,
no, it's my argument.
Yeah, you're looking for a blanket rule that can be applied to everybody everywhere. That's the problem I have with your approach. I'm talking about case by case basis. I can't give you one answer for every case. That was the whole point of my opening, that these things have to be considered. Your answer is just no. Every single time someone says, you go, no. There's a problem with this, and you go, no. The problem with this,
but under your logic, where does it end? When do we get to say no? Like, what is when do we get to do that? Like, where does this end, Kieran?
Well, I don't get to decide. It gets worked out by the people in the community where the monument is. That's what I'm advocating for.
What do you think?
It depends on the particular statue. This is the point I'm getting at. You're looking for a blanket rule. You're looking for a one size fits all.
No, I'm looking for a standard to not destroy our history.
A standard to not destroy our history.
Yeah.
Well, start with the premise that we don't. That's the starting point.
We don't preserve our history?
No, we don't destroy it. Sorry. I thought you said destroy it. Yeah. Start from that premise. Generally speaking, the default position is we don't remove statues, and the burden goes on to the person who's opposed to it. Make them make an argument in a specific case. I'm open to the conversation. I'm open to the debate and the conversation on a case-by-case basis. Begin by saying you don't just get to say, I'm offended, therefore the mobs come in and pull down a statue. But we start with the default that we keep them all. You have to make, a person who wants to pull them down has to make their case. And that can be through a political conversation. It can be through debate. It can be through a social discussion. What I'm saying is just leave the door open that there could be a time when the community en masse, and it's going to sound like, yes, like it's a popularity thing, or it's a consensus, or a majority, something like that. But given that, you know, most Western countries run by some kind of democracy, that seems fair to me to apply that to this issue as well.
But this isn't democracy. This is mob rule. These groups that get together and shout and say we need to take down these structures, they're not democratically elected to do so.
I'm opposed to them too. I didn't talk about people running down the streets and tearing. There's nothing in the prompt that says anything about that.
No, even if they do it in a nice way, even if they public pressure,
sure,
or with the threat that they are going to, in many cases, especially with Black Lives Matter, if they don't get their way, they're going to burn cities to the ground.
Sure.
How is that not basically just a hostage situation, a hostage negotiation at this point? That's not intellectual discussion. That's just giving way to tyranny.
Yeah, I'm saying don't do that. I'm saying have intellectual discussion.
But that if that intellectual discussion is based on do this or enough of us are going to do it anyway, how is that actually a discussion?
You're just talking about mobs.
The case that you gave, you said that Black Lives Matter ended up tearing it down anyway. So even in the case you gave, they basically did what they were going to do, whether they got their way or not.
I swear you tuned out while I was giving my opening. The very next thing I said was that was the wrong way to do it.
Sure.
That's beside
But
the
my
point.
My point is, if a group who is very vocal, like Black Lives Matter,
sure,
comes to the table and they are saying, yeah, we want this statue taken down, what do you think they're going to do if they don't get their way?
Well, we see what happens. I'm not saying it's right. That's not
so
my
why
argument.
even entertain this?
Not my argument. Because sometimes there are people with genuine concerns.
Okay, and what are those genuine concerns?
Often they're going to be based around the who put the statues up and why. Okay, so say for example, now I'm not going to give an opinion on this. I'm not going to give an opinion because I don't know enough about it. But here's a real world example where a conversation could be had. There was a peak of Confederate statues, like I said, around 1900.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There was a second peak around the 50s and 60s, which was when the civil rights movement was starting to take hold. So it looks like to some people, this is the argument they make, that whenever there's movements to give black people more rights, there seems to be an increase in Confederate statues around in the South. That's the argument some people make. Now, if that was legitimate, would it be fair that some people would sort of say, like most of the Confederate statues went up about 40 years after the end of the Civil War. They went up around the time when the Constitution, well, after the Reconstruction, which was to give people rights, including banning slavery, and then a whole bunch of statues went up all over the South. That looks like a resistance to the values that were being developed societally through the Constitution. Would it be fair that some people look at that and say, I don't really want that in my town. I don't think that represents, there's something going on here. There's a political movement, there's a lobby group who are forcing this into our public spaces. Would that be a fair conversation to have?
Sure, you could have the conversation, but you'd also have to prove correlation, like causation here, that they're going, you'd have to prove that that's the reason they did it. But also, even taking that into account, these statues, these monuments, they are put in place at the time, and it's a representation of what the people thought at that time, and it has historical value.
Well, let me ask you.
You can't separate the two.
No, to some people, it represents a resistance against the values of the time. It just happened to be that a lobby group managed to gain the political power to make it happen, such as, like I said, the UDC, right? That they're a powerful lobby group. At one point, they were 100,000 strong, and they did have immense power. So some people might see that and say those statues aren't legitimate. They aren't legitimate. They don't represent us. What also happened was there was factories that were producing generic statues of the Confederate foot soldier. It was just like
did the Colosseum represent everyone at the time? Why does it have it to represent the entire all the people at the time? That doesn't follow.
The Colosseum wasn't a monument. It was an arena.
It was built post event to glorify emperors.
Yeah, good.
Many of these monuments were built post event.
I'm wondering.
So I also don't see why that's a valid argument either. Just because they were put up post event doesn't really mean anything. What I'm looking for is an actual argument as to why we should take these down just because a bunch of people say that they don't like it.
Well, I gave you one because sometimes they don't represent. Sometimes they were done for other reasons than what people thought they were there for.
Okay, well, the Colosseum doesn't represent people in Rome currently, so how does that follow?
I got no idea what you're talking about.
You're saying it doesn't represent. You're saying the monument or statue, whatever the thing is, doesn't currently represent what the populace of the current time is, so they should be able to remove it. Right? Is that your argument?
I said that could be a basis for a conversation. I can't give you a blanket answer for everything.
So, but a conversation of what this thing represents is different than a conversation of let's take it down. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So then we shouldn't entertain conversations of destroying historical monuments, but if people want to have conversations around what it represents for its time and the effect it had on history, sure, by all means, go ahead. Could you not agree with that?
No, why shouldn't we entertain conversations about removing a monument? What's wrong with that?
I gave you the reasons in my opening.
Can you just sort of narrow it down for me?
Yeah, monuments educate on historical's full spectrum, promoting moral growth and preventing repetition of errors. That's one.
Sure. Yeah, they also safeguard heritage and they defend free expression. I got you. I forgot I made notes on that. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, educate the full spectrum and help us to avoid. Yeah, of course.
Because you even brought this up in your opening that history is complex. I agree. It's complex and it should be examined in all its complexities, not through the lens of what some people would have us look at by erasing parts of it to suit their needs.
On that one, we're back to that point we were on before, where I was arguing that the location of the monument is also important. So by my argument, you can take it down from the town square, put it in a museum, you can still have the education and you can still avoid the mistakes of the past.
That does nothing, because that's just going to be, that's kicking the can down the road. Because the next argument will be this statue shouldn't be in the main hall. It should be in the back. It should be covered up. And if you think about it just for a moment, you know logically that's what the next argument's going to be.
Well, yeah, but fair enough, and I would resist that. Okay.
But why resist that? Because what makes it special about that fight being in the museum versus where it currently is?
Because in the town square is like a pinnacle of, like it's a pinnacle area. It's a bit like in the old days when in any given village, the highest point in the town was the steeple and the cross on top. So from any point in the town, you could see the church. The church was like the central icon of the city. Often a historical character on a Diaz up on a in the middle of town, like in France, they often put him in the middle of large roundabouts in sort of Paris and areas like that. They're there to keep them all the time in the hearts and minds of the people, to represent the values or the pride or whatever it is. So it's there for the hearts and minds, as opposed to being in a museum where it can be part of an educational system, but it's not the prominent feature in the city. Would you agree that a statue the significance of it changes if it's in the middle of town, in the town square, or if it's in a museum? Are they different things?
Of course, it robs it of
What's
its
the difference?
context.
What's the difference?
It robs it of its context. Its
You can teach
historical
about the
location.
context.
It
You can teach
robs
about
it of what?
You can teach the context.
Exactly. You can teach the context where it currently is.
Yeah, I think you're avoiding the point I'm making.
No, restate it.
Putting a statue in the middle of town, in the middle of the city square, there's a reason why it goes there. Because we want it to represent, not only have a historical connection, but to represent the values that we have today. So every
No.
time we're driving to work,
No, because I think this is where you're getting this wrong. A historical monument being up is not a affirmative that we agree with everything it represents or the person and that it represents and their moral framework. Those are two completely separate things.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so if you agree with that, then why would we not just push for, okay, you want to have this discussion over this guy or whoever it is, it's controversial, sure, we can have that discussion. Maybe they put up a plaque next to it to give more details and facts, and then there can be an open dialogue of what this person was, who they were at the time, why the people at that time actually thought it was a good idea to even put the thing up in the first place, and then the discussion can be had of how we don't repeat the same errors in the future.
I agree with you 100%. And in probably 90% plus of instances, I would agree with you. I do believe in almost all what you're saying, that they are historical. They do represent the past. They help us to avoid mistakes if we have the discussions, etc. I totally agree. What I'm talking about is simply having a mechanism that not be a blanket situation, where there is a mechanism whereby we can have these discussions and the possibility to remove them. So look, I'll take a kind of it's a bit of a leap, but bear with me. I'm doing this in good faith. Someone like Saddam Hussein, for example, when he was ousted, the people of Iraq thought, and justifiably so, they wanted to tear down all the statues of this guy that were all over the country. Do you think they should have said, no, we have to keep these statues because they'll teach us about the past and et cetera, et cetera? My argument is they know full well about the past. They can learn about it in schools. They can have a museum, of tyranny where they can learn about it, but they don't want Saddam Hussein in their fucking face every time they're walking down the road and every time they're going to work. Now, sure, they went with cranes and bulldozers and stomped on the statue's head and shit like this. Whatever. That was a complete mess. But could you imagine them having a meeting and having a commission and saying, right, we need to take down these statues? And could you make an argument that it's justified they can do that? That's justified?
Well, you said in your statement there that the memory is still fresh, right? It's still like people aren't going to not think about this guy or not forget just because the statue's taken down.
That's a fair comeback it's a fair comeback because it was still in living memory and the guy was still alive. So you could argue.
Well, no, hold on. I want to expand on that. My point is, would you agree that, let's just take Saddam Hussein for example. There's statues everywhere, and they want to remove it to kind of, I guess, lessen that memory, and also that memory isn't going to go anywhere because you can read about him in books and people are very much aware of who that person is. Is that accurate?
Yeah. That they don't.
Okay, well then that begs the question. Then, if the memory is still there, then what's the point of taking it down in the first place?
Okay. It could be Saddam Hussein. It could be Stalin. Okay. Your family was brutally murdered by this guy's henchmen. Your life was destroyed. You lost everything. Violence, death, everything. Now you got rid of him. But every time you're on your way to work, you've got to pass 5 statues of the guy. Do you think you could make an argument that we should take these down?
Well, what better monument to his fall than to have a statue to look at and discuss over, and he's no longer around?
That's
Same thing goes
retarded.
for Saddam Hussein.
Bro, I didn't expect you to say something like that. What better? What?
Yeah, he's currently no longer around. What happened to him?
So, like, have you seen, for example, statues of Stalin where he looks magnificent? Like it's that classic Soviet thing. He's got adults and children around him at his knees, and he's standing looking all fucking amazing. Great. That's a great reminder that he's gone, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's no longer there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But the statues are.
But also, it's also a bit of a category error, or that you're putting forth here, because you have a situation of multiple, hundreds of statues versus a few.
What's the difference?
So it's not the same thing now, is it?
It's not the same thing, but you tell me the difference. Apart from the fact that
Well, the difference is in
how
the
category error? How does the numbers? How does different numbers make it a category error?
Because if you have so if you have like 1,000 Colosseums, it would take away from its uniqueness, and it would have other. Because you're comparing a few statues to a guy who had statues damn near everywhere. It's not the same thing.
No, but it's the same.
Because there's not, like, in a lot of cases, it's just like one statue versus this guy who has statues everywhere.
Look, I'll just let it slide. That's not.
There's a different category.
Okay. How?
Okay, so you have one guy who has thousands of statues, and you have one guy who has one statue. You don't see the difference there?
If I'm talking about one cat, if I'm talking about issues that concern cats, and I'm talking about one cat, but over here I'm talking about 10 cats, is that a category error? No. If I'm
in the framework that you're trying to put forth, yes. In the framework you're trying to put forth,
that's a category error.
No, you're trying to put forth an argument for this guy has thousands of statues everywhere. Why shouldn't we be able to take down a few of them versus just one or two statues?
Make it one, okay. Make it one. Say there was one statue of Saddam Hussein right in the middle of Baghdad.
And you'd be okay with that?
Yeah, rip the fucker down, yeah.
No. I'm saying, I misunderstood you. If they took everything down except for a few to preserve the history, you'd be okay with that?
Oh, they might have some reason to keep some, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, that would still be preserving the statue. Just because
some.
Okay. So you would still be preserving that historical monuments. Because you have, like, let's say one or two, and then you still have the history of that area.
But you realize I'm saying some shouldn't be preserved.
Why? Because you just said that you'd be okay with one or two. So you're saying now they all need to go, right?
I didn't say they all need to go.
Okay, so clarify, please.
The people involved, people in Baghdad, people who I feel would be justified in saying we want to pull down all the statues, well, some of the statues, the main ones. Somebody might say all of them, some might say none of them. I could imagine that there could be someone who could make the argument, pull down the one in the town square, pull down the one at City Hall, pull down all the prominent ones. There might be a park somewhere where there's a bust. And somebody might make the argument, yeah, let's leave that one and we'll put a plaque there and, we'll call it the Park of Doom or something. And that can be a place where people go and learn. Sure. You see, that the point is I'm not making the argument for either or. You're looking for a blanket statement to address the prompt.
Well, no, I could see. I will even concede that. I will say that I could see a structure where you would have not all of them come down, but you would still preserve history through a few. But that doesn't contend with a lot of these other issues we see where it is just one or two statues and they want them all gone. And that's where I have a problem.
Yeah, I can concede that. That's fine. Okay,
so then you would be okay with a few. You said you'd be okay with a few Saddam and Stalin statues for monumental historical reasons. Call it the Park of Doom, whatever you want to call it.
I said I can understand an argument being made for that, right? So like I'm in terms of addressing the prompt, it's a kind of an either or proposition, right? So should be reserved regardless of offense. Okay.
Yeah, and what I just stated would still preserve those statues. Maybe not all of them, but I mean there is a,
so
it's a different category it's a different category of magnitude that we're talking about here.
Well, why would you
like
say
one or two statues versus thousands or hundreds, whatever it is? That's a completely different beast.
So you would be okay with them taking down some statues?
In the very specific case where there's thousands of them, you would still be preserving historical evidence and history if you still had some of them up. Especially if they're all pretty much just carbon copies of each other, which a lot of those were. They were just different poses.
So some of them shouldn't be preserved.
I'm saying that I'm not making a should claim. I'm making I could see an argument for that claim.
You could see an argument for why some statues shouldn't be preserved.
In the case of like having hundreds and hundreds of them and it's all the same guy. But that's not at all what we're talking about really here. We're talking about a few Confederate statues, or we're talking about the Arc de Triomphe, or we're talking about the Colosseum. We're talking about actual historical monuments that have a checkered past, that if you let your logic and what you're saying go through, everything is on the chopping block. We won't have any history left because there's always going to be another group who is upset with whatever the current thing is. And what it boils down to, what it actually reduces down to, is these people. It's an argument of my culture is less evil than your culture. That's what it really reduces down to. And
what's wrong with that?
Huh?
What's wrong with that?
What's wrong? Because it's their logic to justify destroying Western history. That's what's wrong with it. And here's the thing: if we want to play this game, if we actually want to play this game and look into the other cultures and actually what they have their offenses are, I assure you, the offenses are legion. They are legion.
Oh, sure.
So it's best for these people to just not go down this route, and we are in a state of courtesy where we allow them to dig through history, have discussions, but that courtesy stops when they decide to start destroying history.
Yeah, I still think I can make an argument that there are occasions.
I'm waiting for one.
I've been doing it the whole fucking night, mate.
Why? No, you haven't given me a reason why this actually should be done. All I've heard is mob rule tactics.
No, I've made no mob rule tactics at all. You keep invoking them, but I've never made them at all.
Okay, well then explain to me what exactly is the reasoning to allow this? Why should we allow historical monuments to be destroyed? Maybe I missed the argument somewhere in there, but all I've heard is just appeal to ad populum.
No, it's not. You keep on your ears tuned, primed, listening for a one answer fits all, and I'm not giving one. What I'm saying
is, give me whatever the complexity is of that. I'm interested to hear what could justify this.
For the third time?
Summarize it for me.
Again, there should be a mechanism to assess the validity of historical monuments, and in the event that they are found to be not what we thought they were, something like that, then there is a way, a process by which they can be removed or taken down or moved, whatever.
And who decides if the statues should be reviewed or looked at?
The people who it affects.
And who are the people that it affects?
The people who live there.
The people that are crying out to have it taken down?
That's some of them. There are also people arguing that they should stay.
And what metric would you use to justify taking it down or not?
They'd have to figure it out amongst themselves. Like I said, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. And I'm not trying to avoid your question. I'm genuinely saying it's going to be a case-by-case basis, but I reject your idea that there's just a blanket no, it can never happen. Even though you conceded that, in the case of Hussein, that you would be okay with a certain number of them being taken down.
Well, like
So
I said, it's a completely different category of magnitude that we're talking about.
the magnitude isn't really the issue.
Well, yeah, you have like when I say magnitude, I mean like number of statues. That's what I mean.
Okay, well, okay, let's make it simpler. Let's imagine that there was only ever, and we'll make it more historical. Let's just say there was only ever one statue of Saddam Hussein, and it was a big 20-foot fucking statue up on top of an obelisk, right in the middle of Baghdad. You could see it from every border. And then after he died, the next generation, etc., whatever, decided they were sick of looking at this fucking thing. They knew the history, they knew the torment, they knew the horrendous things that had been done, and they said, "Look, we don't want to rewrite history. We want to remember, but we don't need this guy standing in the middle of our town at 20 foot tall every time we're walking around and going around about our business. We don't want when we reopen our tourists industry, we don't want every photo that goes out there showing the beauty of Baghdad to have this motherfucker right there, pride and place. Take the statue down, put it in a field somewhere, put a fence around it, and say, this is the guy who did all that." That's something like that.
Isn't there still people there who actually view Saddam Hussein very favorably?
I have no idea.
There are.
Okay.
So well, I mean, if you're going to have this discussion, if you're going to go down this train of thought, if in your case there's one giant statue, no, I think it should be preserved to some degree because it represents that time period and what it was that brought it to being, and then you can have that discussion.
That's what you think. Okay, so what if they held the equivalent of a referendum, and all the people got to vote, and the majority of people voted to move it? How would you feel about that?
I would err on the side of preserving history, but this is also going down. This is kind of like apples and oranges. When I'm talking about, when I'm talking about, when we talk about the Confederacy and all these other, Christopher Columbus, these types, you would agree that it's not the same as Saddam Hussein, wouldn't you?
In what way? Sort of explain that to me a little better.
Well, Christopher Columbus was an explorer, and he was kind of sketchy at times, but he did represent the spirit of exploration.
Yeah, but in terms of
very favorably,
in how does that map over onto the Saddam Hussein?
It doesn't. That's my point. It doesn't really.
Why doesn't it?
Well, because one was a dictator that a lot of people don't like, and he did a lot of unsavory things, and the other was.
I'm not following. What's the point of the comparison?
I'm saying that they're not the same. You can't really compare the two.
Yeah, but why are you telling me that? I don't understand what the point of the comparison is.
I'm saying that it's kind of apples and oranges comparison.
Yeah, but why? Like, what's the point of? I don't understand what point you're making. I really don't.
I'm pointing to the fact that when we talk about controversial historical monuments, we're mainly talking about characters like Christopher Columbus, the Confederate people,
really,
Napoleon, even all these other people who are viewed a certain way and not necessarily hated by like 90% of the people who live where he's at.
Okay, so Napoleon, the guy who instigated slavery?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who like Napoleon. But a lot of people don't know about that.
I don't quite know where you're going with it. Like what's the point of it? I really don't. Like, I've lost track of what sort of point you were making here by
I'm saying your example of Saddam Hussein is not in the same, like that example of hundreds and hundreds of statues, and I'll just be generous. Let's say 95% of the people there hate him, is not the same as a Confederate statue where a lot of people look at it as historical monument and some sort of Southern pride, and you have a small vocal minority that wants to destroy it. It's not the same scenario. That's my point.
No, that's fair. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not the same scenario.
So I'll give you another example of how this can get out of hand.
Sure.
the British Library in 2020 announced that they were going to create a list of authors, including manuscripts and important documents, by these authors who had some connection to slave trade or colonialism. They produced a short, sort of black list of the authors, including the late poet laureate Ted Hughes.
Sure.
Now, Hughes was included and allegedly had an ancestral link to slavery. This became their basically their offense standard in order to purge these examples.
Yeah, sure.
But the problem with that is this isn't even the sins of the father debate anymore. This is the sins of the ancestor 4 centuries earlier debate.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is where this logic leads. This is where, this is, we need to
not necessarily
censor people. It is.
Not
It's
necessarily.
ancestral guilt that's being used to stain reputations even centuries later. This becomes an absurd and impossible standard to apply fairly. Another example was Stanley Spencer in that same situation. He painted The Resurrection of Cookham. Okay, it was a beautiful painting called The Resurrection by Stanley Spencer, painted in the 1930s. It was a depiction of the physical resurrection of the dead at the Day of Judgment. All the people coming out of the tombs in the village of Cookham. Well, the Tate Institute in the UK now has a descriptor plaque on it that's saying this painting is racist. The reason they have that, is because the painting depicts some black people as well. Now, he wanted to show the resurrection of all humanity, but he didn't have to do this, but he wanted to. But the reason why they say it's racist is because they're saying the black people in the painting are too generic. The reason being is he didn't have access to anything to look at other than magazines. Because, shocker, there weren't any black people in 1930s in Cookham.
Yeah, I get it. I'm fully aware that in England, England's gone insane, and particularly through the culture wars, where every man who had a second uncle who once was bad to a black person is now called a racist. I get it. What you're doing is you're invoking the slippery slope. And I'll concede the slippery slope isn't always a fallacy. That sometimes does happen. But I'm saying we can do things while being aware of that slippery slope and having checks against it. All I'm talking about is having a mechanism to have the discussion. You may find there are times where it's appropriate. You're just saying, no, shut it down. No change. There's no conversation.
Yeah, and the reason I take this approach, is because when you entertain these lunatics, they always want more and more and more. And even in your case where we move them to a museum, which by the way would be preserving them, but even though you move them to a museum, you're going to have another issue down the road where, we don't want this one on the main floor. We want it in the back somewhere. It's just going to kick the can down the road.
That's
all it's going to do.
Just about standing your ground.
Yes, and I think you should abandon this cancel culture notion you have and join my side and stand your ground where they belong in history, in the historical landmarks where they're located.
Hang on a minute. What cancel culture stance do I have?
That's what this is. It's cancel culture. That's all it is.
No, it's not. Of
course it is.
It's fucking reason.
It's left-wing ideology, progressive nonsense to cancel someone and say, we don't like this guy. And I could get together, Kieran, and I could get a bunch of people that could make a pretty damn good argument that Lincoln was the first dictator in America. He did some horrendous things. We should actually take all his shit down too. So what's to stop me from not doing that? Under your paradigm, I could do that and it would be fine.
I'm starting to think you aren't even talking to me. You're talking to some other character in your.
I'm attacking your argument. Whether you realize it or not, this is where it leads. That's the problem with this.
When you say
the logic that you're espousing, this is where it leads.
When you say that I have a cancel culture stance, you are not attacking my argument.
You're saying we should bend the knee to these small vocal minorities that even approach the idea that you just said we should have a mechanism for them to go through in order to remove these statues.
I didn't say it's a forgiven outcome.
But you're putting something in place for them to actually do this. That's what they
may not be raving lefties. There could be normal, considered people who just have an idea that something should change. Right? There could be quite rational, quite caring, quite even conservative people who form the opinion, this statue is not relevant, it's not appropriate. I think it'd be a good idea if we thought about moving it and putting something more appropriate there. That could happen. You're doing a bit of identity politics and saying anyone who disagrees with you is a raving woke lefty.
How is this not identity politics when they're targeting people that they identify as being slave traders and they don't like anymore? This is identity politics.
You're making it about slavery. You asked me at the very beginning, is that the basis of my argument? And I said no. For example, when it comes to the conversations about the Confederate statues, there's more to it than slavery. There's a lot more to it. I already said that, but you keep coming back to slavery and saying I have some kind of.
You admitted that with the example that I gave going into Arc de Triomphe, you said that the standard of egregious, connection to slavery was a big effect of the reason to take them down.
It's one element.
Well, that's all I hear from like Black Lives Matter. So you must be representing some other argument that these people don't currently have, because that's what
I am representing a different argument. That's what I said. You won't listen to my argument. You're thinking about theirs and then trying to argue that against
your
me.
argument enables them to do what they want, though.
No, it doesn't. How?
Yes, it does.
How?
Kieran, you just said multiple times that you're okay with creating some sort of avenue or some sort of system for them to go through and take these statues down. How is that not appealing to what they want?
A process to go through to have the conversation. I said there's no you're assuming,
conversation about the statue is fine. Conversation on taking historical monuments down is not.
But they could end up, you go through the mechanism and find out the answer is no, we're keeping it. That could happen. Like, you understand? Like, you seem to be saying, oh my God, if you speak to them, you're going to give in to them. No, I'm saying
no, we can speak to them, but like I said, this is a courtesy situation we're in, and that courtesy stops when they decide to start destroying historical landmarks. That's where it stops.
Why is it a courtesy?
Because it's a courtesy to allow them to look into history and critique it.
Who are the people who are affording the courtesy?
The people who represent Western values and history.
Yeah, okay. Okay. One of those values would be open discussion.
I just said we could have an open discussion.
Yeah.
But open discussion, if I have an open discussion with you about how, I could, beat you up in a fight, is one thing versus me going over there and pummeling you and saying that's a completely different scenario.
Sure.
One is action towards some sort of violence. The other one is just a discussion that we're bullshitting over and saying, well, no, I'm stronger. No, I'm stronger.
That's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about.
Of course it does. We're talking about action to remove something or to inflict something versus discussion over the context of the statue and the historical monument that in question.
Does like you mentioned before about Western values, does Western values include something along the lines of like peaceful change?
Peaceful change is, we can have the discussion.
Sure. So we could have a discussion about, transplanting a statue, putting something else
change,
there and do it peacefully.
But peaceful change in all Western values is predicated on our history and understanding how we got here. We didn't get here through a utopia. We got here through trial and error and finding out what works.
Yep. So what?
So to destroy that history would be an attack on Western values.
To do what would be an attack on Western values?
To destroy our history would be an attack on Western values and what it represents.
Removing a statue is not destroying history.
How is it not destroying history?
How is it?
It's destroying historical monuments. So how is it not destroying a part of history?
A part of history. That's a difference, right? As opposed to history. You made a pretty big claim there that destroying statues, like a statue, is erasing history. I'm being a bit pedantic, but I think it's important because you seem to be making this sort of thing that it's the issue of erasing history. I addressed that in my opening statement. You can maintain
Okay, how-
history. You can maintain history while
You can
still
maintain history.
you can maintain your knowledge of history and the
Uh-huh.
education about history while moving a statue.
Okay, so if you could maintain history and the statue is essentially irrelevant, is what you're trying to say, right?
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, so but it's irrelevant in as far as maintaining history. Is that what your point is?
Like I said, there's a complex interplay.
Well, no. Hey,
between-
hold on. Answer the question.
I'm answering the question.
Is it irrelevant to maintaining history, removing statues?
Sorry, say it again. I don't understand.
Is removing a statue or a monument irrelevant to maintaining history?
Is it irrelevant to maintaining history? I don't even know what that question means, mate.
Is
Can you
it
rephrase it? I'm too stupid to understand it. Can you rephrase it?
is so you when we say history, history can be in books, it can be in discussions, the public knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. Is removing a historical statue irrelevant to preserving that history?
Is it irrelevant to preserving the history? Is it irrelevant? I don't understand the question, mate. Is it irrelevant to preserving history? Okay, no.
It's not.
I'm
Well,
just
if it's
giving you an
not,
answer.
then okay. Well, if it's not, then the statue should stay where it is.
Okay.
And if it is irrelevant and the history is still in the memories of the people and they have the books, then the question becomes, if the memory is such a painful thing, what's the point of even removing the statue in the first place if the history is still exists?
I think I got you. Moving the statue could become part of the history. You see, like I'm seeing history as an ongoing process. So what you could have when the statue goes to a museum, you have photos of it being taken down. You have documents where it was discussed in Parliament. You could have all that. That becomes part of the history. So yeah, like it's relevant to preserving history because it becomes part of the ongoing history. Your stance just seems to calcify everything. Like we have to protect history. We've got to keep.
No, my stance is to avoid a slippery slope where the Arc de Triomphe is on the slab to be taken down.
Yeah,
George Washington statues are on the slab to be taken down.
I know.
I could collectivize with a bunch of people and take down all of Abraham Lincoln's stuff because he was a freaking dictator and I don't like him. All of this is on the table under your logical view of how we should approach this. That's my point.
How's it under? When you say under the table, what do you mean?
On the table.
On the table
to be removed. Everything is what survive under. Okay, if we make Kieran king of the day, for a day, and you enact this and you put this in place, and you make it widespread. Okay, everything is on the table. What survives, Kieran? What exactly survives?
Whatever
under that
paradigm. Survives. Whatever we decide.
Okay, so we just like scrub all of history can be scrubbed because
what the hell are you talking about? That's not my position. I don't know what. So you aren't talking to me, mate.
Do you understand logically how it leads to that? You don't get this? Okay, here. Let me make it more relatable to you. Okay, if PETA decides to come to Australia and they're gonna tear down all the Steve Irwin statues, I would be like, no, fuck you guys. You can't take down Steve Irwin. That's all Australia has. Fuck you guys. You can't have it. Okay? Does that make more sense, Kieran?
What? Like I said, bro, you aren't talking to me. You're talking to some caricature of some lefty you have in your head. You keep jumping to these extreme examples. Oh my God, Kieran wants to tear down all the statues. Kieran wants to erase history.
No, I'm not saying you personally necessarily want to do it. I'm saying that your logical framework, this is what it leads to.
I've also addressed that as well. It doesn't have to go that way.
It doesn't have to go that way, but guess what? It will go that way because if you have Black Lives Matter saying, hey, we want to take this statue down, and then Kieran walks up and says, well, fill out this form and we're going to, go down and we're going to discuss it. Maybe a few of them might go along with that. But guess what's going to happen if it doesn't go their way, Kieran? What? They're going to do what they did to the statue over there where they tore down the guy that you gave in your example. They're just going to tear it down because this is how these people operate.
Okay. Again, it's got nothing to do with my position. What you're saying is if so what you're saying effectively, Kieran, if people don't agree with your position, they'll just go and tear it down anyway. That's got nothing to do with me. If they don't agree with your position, they can still go and tear it down. In fact, they're more likely to do it by your position because they can't even talk to you.
No. Under my position, they'd be locked up for even attempting it.
There you go.
And they get a boot on the neck.
Good job. That's the way.
Yes.
That's going to work out great. It always works out great.
It will.
Yeah,
it will.
So you're
yes. Anytime you have a violent mob that uprises and wants to burn a city to the ground, yes, you should restore rule of law, Kieran.
You want to maintain this wonderful Western values, but you aren't prepared to engage in the very activities that produced and maintain those Western values. You just want to lock everything down.
When did we ever? Okay, in what part of Western values tells us we get to destroy our historical monuments, Kieran?
You want to benefit from...
No, hold on. You made a claim. What Western value tells us we can destroy our history and our historical monuments?
I didn't say that. I said open dialogue, engaging, peaceful change. You aren't prepared to engage because you want to lock it all down. You don't want it to change. You enjoy it, but you aren't prepared.
No, I said it can change. We could put little plaques there to give more context.
The way that you want it to.
No, I want it to change. I don't want it to change and I don't want to go down this slippery slope of uprooting history to appease some violent, small, vocal minority. That's what I don't want.
It may not be a small vocal minority. It could be a significant minority. It could be a majority. It could be a silent majority.
Yeah, I mean, you could, like I said, you could think of a scenario like you said, Saddam Hussein, where he has hundreds and hundreds of statues, and let's say 95% of the people don't want to have every freaking statue up. That is a different animal than we don't like, let's say the Colosseum anymore. We want to take it down.
So we're going to start with Mo. Whenever you are ready to do your closing statement, I will start the timer up with your voice.
Okay. Well, first off, thanks Easy again and crew for putting this together. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun. Thanks Kieran for showing up. As we conclude here in this debate on the preservation of controversial historical monuments, I think we should reaffirm the fundamental principle. These artifacts must endure, irrespective of offense, to uphold the unparalleled legacy of Western civilization, its European roots in profound art, philosophy, and enduring systems of governance that have propelled human advancement. My opposition has advanced arguments seemingly centered around kind of selective accountability. We talked about Confederate statues and the links to slavery. Well, then you have to talk about Napoleon and what he did and the Arc de Triomphe. These all play into my point where if you entertain this logic and you go down the line, everything is pretty much on the chopping block and there will be nothing left. These people will never be sated. It's always going to be some new offense or some new thing that they don't like. George Washington will be next. It's just a matter of time. Lincoln, whatever, everything is on the chopping block for these people once you entertain this insane worldview. Dismantling these monuments, it constitutes an assault on Western identity, forfeiting philosophical rigor and artistic excellence. Preservation is not sentimentality. It's a resolute defense of truth against emotional grievances. We must commit to this for prosperity's sake and to provoke further discussion and debate. But we don't do that by taking down historical monuments and hiding them away somewhere. And even going back to early in the debate, Kieran even conceded that putting them in a museum, well, that would be a form of preservation. But even that, I say, is not a good idea because you're just kicking the can down the road. The next argument will be, they shouldn't be in the main hall. They should be in the back hall with a sheet on them or something of that nature. So I'll leave the audience with a few questions. Who benefits from allowing outrage to dismantle our heritage? Society at large, or those intent on weakening our established systems? Should monuments be viewed solely as endorsement of a person they're attached to? If so, the Arc de Triomphe should come down, right? And with that, I'll leave it the rest of my time.
All right. Thank you for that closing statement, Mo. And with that, we're going to hand the mic over to Kieran. And Kieran, whenever you're ready for your closing statement, I will start the timer up with your voice.
Thanks. I think, first of all, Mo was surprisingly generous to my position in his closing there. I appreciated that. Mo's position is a very basic, a very simple one. And it's an either or proposition or an all or nothing proposition. And that's not surprising given that he seems to view the world, and this issue at least, as a rabid mob of blue-haired wokies against the world. Doesn't seem to a bit like the people who kind of argue that all Trump supporters are mouth-breathing rednecks, right? When in fact, half the fucking country, educated people, people who are really smart and experienced in life, and yet they're painted all the same. My argument is that there are reasonable people who have reasonable arguments and would like to have a discussion about this, and there should be a mechanism for that. But Mo's afraid of the woke mob. He says, so if the mob comes, what are you going to do? Well, you stand up to them. Well, if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. No, they're not. Just give them an inch. You're kicking it down the road. Well, stop there. So he seems to think that once you engage with them, you're kind of already conceding to them. Then he said, well, if they don't get what they want, they're just going to go and tear it down anyway. Well, they'll do that by his position as well. That's what happens right now. I would argue that Mo talking about enjoying, and I agree completely, appreciating, respecting, and being eternally grateful for the Western world that we live in, but to understand the process by which we got here. And part of that is things like Parliament, the rule of law, which all stems from open discussion and the ability, take, for example, the peaceful exchange of power during an election. There's a mechanism for that. And what I'm saying is, with these important historical monuments and the debates around them and the depth of feeling and sentiment involved in it, that we should apply the same Western value and process to that. Because by your method, there's no other way for it to happen. If you just shut it down, you're a brick wall. You won't even entertain the idea with these people. They'll go and tear the fucking thing down anyway. There's no other option. By my recommendation, there's a channel where reasonable people, and of course you'll get a few lunatics in there as well, but at least we're engaging, at least we're doing something. It doesn't mean we have to lose ground, doesn't mean we have to let them erase history or anything like that. So I think that my argument allows for change, yours doesn't, even though we both respect, admire, and appreciate the history on which our lives are built. And with that, I think I've said what I have to say.
With that being said, we are going to get into the chat Q&A. All right. Usually at the beginning here, I like to ask a question on both sides based on the things I've either heard or something I think needed to be repeated or anything along this nature. So I'm going to start, and then I'll start the timer for the Q&A. So I'm going to start with the against side for tonight. So Kieran, my first question is kind of a clarification, is because you had mentioned how you're okay if they were to just remove it and put these things into a museum or whatever, and then Mo had responded that this is kind of conceding you're okay with the preservation.
Yeah.
But like, to that being said, were you also speaking about like, say, like that big building we were shown at the starting, or any type of
Notre Dame,
Notre Dame, and any type of like architectural history like this, would you be okay with them tearing these things down and just like putting the pictures of them in museums and then talking about them?
No, I think keep them. I think that look, it's going to be messy, and there's always going to be practical considerations which go into each of these. So something like the Arc de Triomphe or Notre Dame are obviously very significant landmarks in and of themselves. And I wouldn't advocate for tearing those down. I could even make the argument that, or even concede the argument that if the ark represented something hideous, that it's going to make me sound like I'm arguing against myself, but the sheer scale of it, the sheer significance, I would say that would seem egregious to me. That would be like them blowing up the Buddhist statues that Mo mentioned earlier.
Just to be clear, even if enough people agreed with it, like even if enough people were just like, almost everybody was like, "This is, we don't want this thing here. We want this tearing down." You would say it would be bad to do.
Yeah, my personal opinion would be it'd be bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That. Okay. Yeah. That was just like, so I had a clarification, and then this next question is so this is oh, sorry. Did you have anything for that, Mo?
No, I mean, not really. I mean, I mean, other than to say that, the Arc de Triomphe would be on the slate for that to, based on some of the things we talked about. People could say, well, this guy put in slavery. We should just have a plaque there with a picture, and we should put pictures in the museum and tear it all down. So it has to be one of my points throughout the debate is, whatever you're going to put forth as an argument, it has to be consistent, because if you're not, then it just boils down to mob rule.
It doesn't, by my position.
Okay. So my next question then is, what objective rule should determine whether a historical monument is preserved or removed? Like what's like the one rule that should determine this?
Well, the whole basis of my argument was that there isn't one. In the very first line, I think, of my opening statement, I said we aren't going to have an objective method to assess this. It's going to have to be through the messy process of politics.
All right. And did you have anything for that, Mo?
Yeah, I would say that we are currently, with the current systems that we have in place now, are engaging in messy politics. Black Lives Matter will take the actions that they see fit, if they're allowed to, whether you give them the option or not to discuss it, because it's not about a discussion for them. It's about getting what they want through violent means.
It seems to me like you're saying because Black Lives Matter, we have to shut down all the discussions because these little fuckers will sneak into it, right?
Well, I'm using them as an example because they are a vocal minority.
Yeah, it's kind of conceding to their position, which is shut the fuck up and I'm going to do it. And you say, no, you shut the fuck up. You're kind of playing.
Well, yeah, but the difference is I have history on my side, and they have
they don't care.
My fifis are hurt. That's basically their complaint.
Yeah, but they don't care. So I'm talking about reasonable people. Look, the fleas come with the dog. I'll create this mechanism for dialogue where we're going to get the fleas with the dog, but I'm prepared to get in there and have a go. Whereas you're saying, shut it down, everything just calcifies and stays how it is.
It's about having standards, Kieran. We have to have standards for what we allow and what we don't allow, and if we don't, then it devolves into anarchy.
I agree with you.
All right. So my first question for Mo's side is actually I wanted to ask you that same question. So we'll start with that one. What objective rules should determine whether a historical monument is preserved or removed?
I would say that if it's something that has significant historical value and context to it, things that the people at the time put up for a specific reason, you can examine that reason and what they were thinking at the time, why they put it up. I'm not saying that someone, if someone goes down and puts up a freaking SpongeBob statue, and in the middle of somewhere, and 10 years later they're like, this thing's god awful and ugly, we should remove it. I'm not saying, oh well, technically it's history, we can't take it down. No, that would be an asinine claim. I'm saying that structures that have a history to it. History books are written about it. It represents a time or phase or some sort of transition. All of this would be markers for what would be significant in order to keep and preserve.
I could concede a little bit to that, to the idea that cultural significance could be a vetoing factor, like with the Arc de Triomphe, right? You could make a claim that yes, something represents something bad, et cetera, et cetera. But I think I could accept that argument that.
Well, you know what also would fit that criteria? Confederate statues in the South.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a question then. Okay. There's one particular guy, Nathan Bedford Forrest. I'm not trying to get a gotcha here. I'll explain who he is if you don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Give me the. I don't have off the top of my head who he is or his history.
Okay. He was a slave trader, a Confederate soldier, and the first Grand Wizard of the KKK. Now, there's a bust of him. I think it's in a courtroom or something like that. There's a bust of him, and some people ask the question: is he really the guy that we want to have in the courtroom? The reason he was put in there was because there was a bust of a northern soldier, and someone said we should balance the scales and put in a Confederate just to make it even. Whether or not they considered his background or not was a different story. So I think you could make the argument. Somebody could say, "Yeah, okay, we need a Confederate bust in there," but maybe. So
it sounds not to interject. Okay, go ahead.
Maybe we shouldn't have that guy there. Would it be really bad to say, look, let's just take that one out. We'll find a different Confederate and we'll put him in there. Would that be okay?
Well, clarification here. So it sounds like this courtroom is a historical structure in of itself in order to have this guy put in at the time, right?
Probably.
So in that case, then you have to ask the question, is that not part of the historical structure of that courtroom?
It wasn't. No, it was added later.
Well, historical as in they added it at the time when they thought it was a good idea to put it in there, that it was acceptable to put this guy in there, because if you go down that line of thought, right, there's lots of structures that have sculpture, like the cathedral has sculptures on it, right?
No, these aren't on the building. It's on a shelf.
Well, it's still
around part of the building.
It's still still sitting there, right?
Yeah, so are the chairs.
Okay. But my point is, depending on the historical history of the building and what this was, when this was put in place, it would qualify under historical monument. And
yeah, but I'm asking,
it's there to be understood as to the people of the time and what they thought and why they put it there. It sounds like they put it there because they had one guy up and they wanted a guy from the other guy from the other side up. But also, I would also, the guy sounds like he has some egregious things in his past. What is the other context? Why did they view him as prominent enough to put him there in the first place?
It's possible that the people it's possible, I'm not saying it's true, it's possible they put him there because he was the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
Okay, maybe so, but
and that's what I'm talking about.
I have no context.
I said sometimes the erection of these monuments is politically motivated. And
a lot of most monuments in history are like politically motivated to some degree.
Sure.
But the point is, okay, we're having this discussion of this guy right now that we don't even understand or have the full context of it. That is what you would lose if you just wipe it all out. Okay? So if someone goes in there and says, why should that guy be there? Why should that guy be there? He represents XYZ. Yeah. Well, then that sparks discussion. Who was this guy? What's his history? Well, okay, he was a piece of shit. Okay, why is he even in here? Oh, it turns out these people believed it was a good idea at the time to put him here. Okay, let's not repeat this in the future because this is a kind of a bad idea. It sparks debate and conversation. What doesn't spark debate and conversation is if you sterilize the entire building, you remove everything from it, and it looks like another office from downtown.
You always go to these extremes, brother. Like you always say, if you sterilize everything, if you wipe out everything. I never said any of that.
You have to test logical arguments with analogies. If you're going to have a situation where you're going to make a case for like we should remove XYZ, you have to consider what does that lead to.
There's a time and a place for using the absurd to emphasize a your opponent's point. This isn't one of them.
And who decides the right time to do this?
To do what?
To go to the absurd and
Well, in
debate
this,
over.
in this instance, right now, me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then, so for my next question, if a monument honors a figure whose primary legacy involves like mass harm, like what moral responsibility, if any, does the state have to like contextualize or counterbalance that message for the public? Like you guys mentioned the Saddam Hussein thing, right? There's probably, as much as like I do, you are right. I've heard of people there that actually do honor him. There's actually specifically like a little city there that like they praise him like he's a god or something. But in something like this, right? If there was like a statue of Hitler or something like this, what moral responsibility, if any, does the state have to contextualize or counterbalance that message for the public?
No, I think the state should have some sort of obligation to kind of inform people and give them history, right? It should I would say that's part of preserving history, explaining what these people were and why the thing is even up in the first place and what possessed the people to put the thing up. So I think that we should have something along the lines of if we do have in that case, right, a character who is just like he's Voldemort, level evil. He's
you have Hitler in Town Square,
right,
or in New York, Times Square.
Like, wow, this is nuts. Why is this here? Yeah, the state should step in to some degree and say, well, this is the reason why it's up. This is what led to it. There should be something there. I would say like a plaque or something could give it could even be part of like a historical tour, could be a state thing where, you take the tour around the city and then you stop and you talk about it and you have an example to point at this egregious thing and everything that came from it. That's all part of the discussion.
I'd prefer to see a situation where the state wasn't involved in that, and where the state actually just was perhaps part of its funding was to fund independent researchers and historians to do that.
You could do something like that could be
Well, the reason I say it is because the state, you don't want the state to be supplying the narrative. I'm sure, Mo, you've heard of the I've just been learning about it the last couple of days, the lost cause. When we talk about this, like the South, you familiar with the lost cause?
It rings a bell, but off the top of my head, I couldn't recite it to you.
I think the guy's name was Edward Pollard. He wrote the Lost Cause. It was the sort of almost a playbook, I think, for the UDC. So there's a whole argument there. I don't take either side. I'm in no position to do that. But the story is that there was an attempt to rewrite Southern history in a different light in the wake of the Civil War. So to kind of minimize the conditions of slaves, to kind of talk about to kind of remove slavery as an issue of the Civil War, and to say it was purely about Northern aggression and Southern independence and stuff like this. So if you have the state telling the narrative, then the current government is going to be the one who are going to be writing the history. And
so neither. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I just wanted to ask a follow-up for both of you there. So neither one of you are on the position that they should remove that and just put it somewhere else. Like if it was something like so egregious to everybody. Everybody was like threatening to get it there. It was constantly at people trying to take it down and shit like this, right? Like, do you see any reason for them to remove it down, or do you think like all historical monuments?
So in that scenario where it's something that is really egregious, then I could defer to Kieran's idea of taking it and relocating it into a museum of some kind and then going from there. But that also would still be preserving it, right? So
okay, yeah. Yeah, I was just wondering, and I know we always
Yeah.
we always defer to like Hitler for like when we're looking at like
yeah.
but like there could be examples of like Vlad the Impaler, like a statue
Stalin.
of
Oh.
Vlad the Impaler that's like in the middle of somewhere, and like people are
He
like,
is
"This dude
actually
did some, like,
loved over
horrible."
there, by the way.
Well, yeah, he's
He-
loved by a
yeah.
lot of people, but like
Yeah.
I think a lot of people go to Adolf Hitler because he's more more close. We can
Vlad got a bad rap. I
he's
can go
more
into a whole
historically
thing
close
with that.
to us.
So could I actually. Yeah, Vlad.
Yeah,
But then you
Vlad
have,
got a very bad rap.
Yeah, right. And then you have Genghis Khan, Pol Pot. There's all these
Not so much of a bad
historical
rap. That guy did
figures
some
that are,
crazy shit.
known
Yeah,
for like
interesting,
mass
What's
bad
interesting?
things. So yeah, I was just wondering if you guys were on that. So yeah,
I think,
okay, that makes sense.
I think I go back to the point I made. There's a dual purpose of historical monuments. One is to maintain awareness of history. The other is to perpetuate values in the current day. Interesting development. Small development. Recently, in a Russian metro station, underground station, they've installed a new statue of Stalin, and it's a classic Soviet style. Like I sort of described before, with the people around him and children with flowers, and he's standing looking very sort of regal. And apparently there's a narrative developing over there, kind of to repaint Stalin as a strong man, as a good leader, as someone who did something powerful for Russia. So that's what I mean about how statues can you question why they were put there? And
hold on. So Stalin, piece of shit, guy was horrible.
Mhm.
Things he enacted was horrendous. But when you look at what he actually did, he did bring the country from the brink of extinction to a superpower.
The
Okay.
fuck?
You go read the history.
Go and speak to someone in the fucking gulags, man.
Karen, I just said he was a piece of shit and his tactics were horrendous.
And
But
Hitler
I'm
got the
saying
flamethrower on
that
time.
when you look at the power structure and what he achieved in such a short period of time, it was crazy what he did, like what he was able to accomplish. That's all I'm saying. You can just because you have a history person from history,
What did he accomplish?
and they do when they do great things, doesn't mean they were good.
What did he
Okay,
accomplish?
I just told you he brought the country from the brink of starvation and collapse into a superpower.
Really? I mean, you're aware of the people dying of starvation?
Kieran, I just said over and over again that the things he put in place was horrendous and caused death, mass death. Yes, I'm saying that what he accomplished was substantial. That's my point, and you can't refute that. You can go review history. That's what he did.
I will agree. Killing tens of millions of people is quite
No.
an accomplishment.
Oh my God.
That's massive.
Oh my God, you don't understand the separation there.
Yes, I
Like, listen,
They aren't
like-
separate. They aren't separate.
I'm saying the
What's the point-
separation. Never
what's the
mind.
point of
Just
bringing-
never mind. You're not getting.
All
I don't understand how to explain it more. Let's just.
All right, we'll get to the chat questions now. All right, so we're going to start up this chat time. A reminder for you all in the chat, listen, you can bump yourself up. We don't have too many super chats, so if you want to get your questions in, you can get in there. But you can bump yourself up with a super chat if we get past them and we're starting to read the other questions. Trench Deacon, should the George Floyd statue be removed? Ooh.
That one's for you. That one's for you, brother.
Oh, I can take that. Yeah, so I think that can fall into what Karen was saying. That route, take it, put it in a museum somewhere, so we can let future generations know how batshit crazy the history was and how brainwashed and retarded these people were. Yes,
But
that
by
should
your
be a
argument-
lesson we learn, and we should drive home. These people idolized a fentanyl addict who OD'd and who was a career criminal and was just a menace to society, and yet this is the shining example these people held up as some sort of a messiah. Yes, we should immortalize that so we never forget how retarded these people were. Yes.
But by your argument, that's just kicking the can down the road. You said it would be better to leave these things in location so people have discussions about it.
Well, I'm okay with either or, but I think you could put it in a museum
What?
too.
No, you literally made the argument all night that they should be left in position because that's what's going to prompt debate. That we're erasing the history by putting it into a
Yeah.
into
So,
a museum
but
and
also
accusing
we
them, right?
talked about, we also discussed with Easy's question, someone who is so basically evil, and the most people come to the conclusion that we don't want this, do want to look at this guy anymore. We would put it in a museum, and that would preserve it.
Okay, let me ask you both a follow-up based on this, just because of what I heard you both answer there. Is relocating monuments to a museum actually preservation, or is it actually like a socially acceptable way to erase them from public memory? Because the idea is, who goes to museums anymore?
You want to take that one first? I'll give my follow-up. Or
Yeah,
my
I think
thoughts.
it's a really good question. It's a real good question. In a sense, you are preserving the history, but you're removing it from as I said before, the hearts and minds of the people. So I could see an argument being made that by taking them out of their location, you're sort of changing the cultural landscape. Now, I would argue sometimes you want to do that because history is so vast that we are never going to have access to everything at all times. There's always going to be a story. There's always going to be a thread. And that thread's always going to be politically motivated, culturally, spiritually, whatever. We're drawing certain points out of the past and we're threading them together into a narrative. Given that we know that's what we're going to do, I think it's worth being thoughtful about that and approaching it that way.
Yeah, I think it does lessen it to some degree. And now that I think about actually going to Trent's question, you know what? Yeah, no, fuck it. They should keep it in the public square. They should keep it where it is, and there should be a plaque on it. So when people come, it be a public shame of that area for all eternity on how stupid these people were to actually put this statue up. That's what it should do. It should be a public shame of like how retarded these people were to actually venerate this guy. Yeah, no, I actually take back the museum. No, keep it exactly where it is and never let that thing go.
So tell me again about the George Floyd statue.
That's what I'm talking about. The George Floyd statue.
Yeah. Belinda for $2 says, "Pardon my simping, but first time I seen Mo smile."
I'll be bright character.
Oh, simping in the chat, Belinda. Don't let the mods see. World Radio 332 for $5 says, "Do Jews want to delete what happened to them in the 40s and erase it from living memory? They enshrine those locations and draw attention to it."
Yeah. So should we just bulldoze all the camps, Kieran? Because they're horrific.
I never said that.
Okay.
I never
That's a
said
good point.
that. Pretty sure if there was a big ass Hitler statue in the center of Tel Aviv, they might have a different opinion about that one. If in some strange universe they had, like in the modern era, let's imagine there was a fascist statue installed by a foreign power during an occupation of Israel, and then they kicked them out. I'm pretty sure the Israelis would probably want to not have that statue in the middle of town.
Another $10 from World Radio. Thank you very much. It comes in. The removal of statues does destroy history because it allows the removal for nuance and thought of that time. Example, people want to vilify founding fathers, will rewrite history books, prior thought lost. What do you guys think?
Yeah, agreed. It removes context. It removes, because you're separating the you can look at these monuments as points of honor. That honor is a snapshot in time of what those people believed the time in order to erect it. So you can't really separate that honor and that feeling from the history itself, and that's all encapsulated in the monument itself.
Yeah, like I said, Mo, I would probably agree with you on over 90% of cases. Yeah, I'm okay with that. But I would just maintain a mechanism to have that discussion. That's all.
Yeah, and that's what you said there is kind of like that's why I was asking what I asked, because like there's like I think it's like 20% or something of adults actually visit museums. That's adults, right? When you actually are taking in the history and everything there, not just looking at the cool stuff. So like that's why I kind of thought the idea. I was like, and I just looked this up because I was curious, because I said most people don't go to museums. I wondered if I was talking shit or what. But yeah, like I don't think many people go to museums these days. So I was wondering if that's still preserving it, if we're just doing that. So yeah,
Yeah, unfortunately, people are starting to lose their interest in history
I know
modernity.
that's dumb. I love history. Yeah. Bobby Ballbags comes in, one of the great names of YouTube, for $5. Says, seriously, Kieran, are you ever going to drop the I'm a silly gay boomer character and show us your true self? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm being a gay boomer.
Ah!
No, but Bobby, come on, seriously. Surely tonight, you can give me a little bit of credit.
Yeah, Bobby. Surely tonight. Kokomo comes in for $10 and says, why is Kieran gay?
It's going to be on my tombstone at this stage.
Look, I would like to say no part of the debate that I employ this tactic at all. I kept it very clean. I did mention Steve Irwin, I'll give you that, and some Aussie stuff. But I mean, come on, but I did not one time stoop to this level.
I
think I should get a medal or something.
I did stoop to calling you retarded a couple of times, so
How it goes. Eclipse not one step back for $10 also says, why is Kieran gay?
It's
Why
the
is Kieran
question of the
gay?
ages. Question of the ages.
Such a good song, though. Should the Cristo Redentor statue in Rio de Janeiro be taken down? What about crosses and other Christian iconography? Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So is that the big one up on the hill?
It's so small over here.
I think that is the big one up on the hill, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. So it's offensive to some people. So should it be taken
a lot of
down?
people?
Yeah, I'd say no. My personal opinion would be no.
But here's the thing, Kieran. That's where this that's where this logic leads eventually.
To what?
To taking down things like statues of Christ and other figures that people don't like.
No, it doesn't.
Of course it does.
What it leads to, by my perspective, what it leads to is if there are people who want to raise that as an issue, they can raise it. I'm not saying we concede to it.
I tell them to fuck off. This is our history. Go make your own history. That's what I say.
World Radio 332 comes in again, says Iraq had 4 major groups. Saddam supporters loved that he kept out terrorists and some of the more backwards thinking zealots and thugs in line, even though he did instruct atrocities. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's the complexities of history. You have a figure like that clearly did some deranged things, but the chatter's point, he might have done some things that the people at the time, and the reason why those people, even some today, still like him and they idolize him to some degree. That is all contextualized in history, and it should be examined and discussed.
Yeah, I think generally with these things, we're going to weigh up the good and the bad, and we'll see where it sits. I think that's the main thing. I mean, this thing, it's like sort of saying, what that thing you were saying before about Stalin, about, that he, did good things for the country. But there's a point where you say, well, what is the country if not the people? And if the people are starving and dying and being murdered, like just hand over foot, being sent to gulags, what's the point of having a good economy?
All right. Next one that comes in is from Wicked Wally. Says, Kieran, Satanists find the giant statue of Jesus in Brazil offensive. What do you do?
Nothing. I don't care.
But would you stand against not removing it?
Personally, I would, yeah.
Okay.
No. Personally, I'd stand to not have it removed, sure. But like just because someone's offended by it, it doesn't mean I have to have a dog in the fight. If there were moves there was a active and substantial movement that was starting to rise, sure. I'm not saying we give it to them, but you say, okay, state your case, explain why. And then I'll explain why not. And then we'll keep it.
So under your view, should there be no, I guess, historical standard for what is and off limits?
Should there be what? Sorry.
Should there be a historical standard for what is and is not off limits? Even under your idea to have the discussion of removing these statues, should there be some sort of historical standard for which we say no, these statues, these monuments, they're off limits, we can discuss it, but maybe some of these other ones are. Is that even in your idea of the discussion, or are you saying that basically the discussion should be had for everything?
Can you give me like an example?
So I don't really have an example. I'm just saying, generally speaking, should certain areas have a historical standard for what is and is not off limits to have the discussion of removal?
No, I think there shouldn't be things off. There shouldn't be things we can't talk about.
No. Discussion of removal, not talk about, just discussion of removal, because then we go back to.
Yes, there shouldn't be conversations we aren't allowed to have.
So
that would effectively be what you're saying, I think.
Well, yeah, but earlier you said that the Arc de Triomphe should not be taken down no matter what, because it's just too historically significant.
Yeah, just in my opinion.
So that's clearly
yeah.
Okay, but that lends itself to the idea that there is something there that is a standard of some kind that you view as, no matter what, we shouldn't take this down.
Yeah, but I couldn't articulate a rule for that. It's just in my case, it'd be more something like you know it when you see it. I don't think I could articulate a specific set of criteria that would
Well, I'm not asking for you to give me a criteria. I'm saying, generally speaking, would you say there are certain things that are off limits, like the Arc de Triomphe?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, well,
I could imagine like a parliament or a government saying we aren't even going to entertain the question of whether something is like, I would imagine, for example, the American government, if somebody wanted to have a conversation about knocking down the White House, I'm pretty sure they aren't going to meet with much of a conversation. It won't be entertained.
Yeah, but I don't think your logic holds, because you're saying there shouldn't be a things we shouldn't be allowed to talk about to take action. I mean, well, then if that's the case, then we should be allowed to talk about we should eat people. Like what is the limit? There has to be some sort of standard. Like it's a matter
of what's going to be entertained, I suppose. Maybe that's where we're getting
right. Okay, so certain conversations we shouldn't entertain.
Well, the people in power, the people who can make these things happen, yeah, they shouldn't be entertaining every Tom, Dick, and Harry with some stupid idea. It's the same as like when you want to, like in certain courts, like the High Court here in Australia, you can't just apply to the High Court. You have to meet certain criteria, because the High Court have certain things that they address. Just because a neighbour's dog pissed on my letterbox, I can't go to the High Court and say, hey, I have a grievance here. Well, they aren't a civil court anyway, but that's beside the point. The point I'm making is that in the community, we can have these conversations, but when it comes to policy and stuff like this, or making changes in society through the political system, yeah, sure, there are certain ideas that won't even get off the ground.
Next one in the Q&A here is, let me see, where is it? Even Lord comes in again says, why is it fair that new arrives who has no ties to the nation have a say on statues erected by the natives of that land?
Good point.
We have a very similar problem here in Australia. Similar, I think like a similar thing is why do people move to Australia? This is similar, but it's topical here. Why do they move to Australia and then march every Sunday down the city streets waving a foreign flag? They've got some beef with some other country, but why here? So I can see your point. If you want to come to a country and then you have a beef with the local history, what the fuck are you doing there in the first place?
Well, it's also like the U.S. is one of the places where we tolerate this nonsense to some degree, right? And it sounds like Australia does the same thing. Imagine if a bunch of Americans went to Japan and started protesting for Japan's culture and how it's they don't like it or for whatever reason. It would be shut down within minutes, right? Because it's not even on the discussion. You don't get to come here and tell us what our culture should and shouldn't be. Worry about your own culture.
It's the paradox of tolerance, like the classic paradox there is should the tolerant tolerate the intolerant.
We got a question from Blazed Bunny here on Twitch. Says, I know you guys were talking about statues in history, and I was wondering if you think all native artifacts and land should be returned to native people and all the artifacts in the museums that should be returned to the tribe they came from.
No.
I'd say when it comes to land, no. In terms of artifacts, look, it's again, these I can't give a one size fits all answer. That could be negotiated between tribes and between museums. You could find a situation where the tribe says, look, some of those artifacts are of particular spiritual importance. We'd like those back. And we don't mind you have the other ones there. You have some spears and some swords, not swords, but spears and some arrowheads and things like that. Yeah, sure. We like the idea that you're promoting our culture. But I could see them saying, look, you have my great grandfather's thigh bone in a glass cabinet. Is it okay if we get that back? I could see them being sensitive to that.
Yeah, I could see that logic, right? The logic that I don't see though is the returning.
Or what if it was like a statue that was removed, like a statue they had erected and it was removed and put in a? Do you think they should get that back, or?
You mean a statue removed from where?
Because these historical artifacts that are in museums obviously came from some place, right? So there's a statue they had or some type of they have the headdresses and stuff like this. Yeah. Do you think these should be returned to the places they were to preserve them?
I'd probably lean more towards yes, in the sense that we're talking about living history. Like we're talking about, the people are still here, and it's still we're trying to coexist. I don't think we need to have, the losers loot in our museums. I think it's okay.
Yeah, because it could quickly turn into that, right? Where everyone, you could have every Tom, Dick, and Harry come through and say, well, that my great, grandfather, they're removed. That's his knife or something.
We have that issue here with land where the Indigenous people say that piece of land over there is sacred, and so our government goes, okay, I'll give it back to you. Then they find a nickel mine next door, and all of a sudden that part's also sacred, right? So it's a real thing. It's like a cat chasing a mouse. At some point, you have to draw a line and say, look, history, that part of history's done. Let's just
and it is a different. It's a different thing. Like if you had a group of people and they had their own museum and stuff and whatever their little culture and there's this piece in a museum and it meant a lot to them and their culture and they were going to preserve it. That would be a different discussion versus some guy just showing up and saying that's my father's this and that and I want it back, and then the museum gives it to him. Yeah, I don't think we should do that, but but generally speaking, I think even primitive cultures should be preserved as much as we can, because we can learn from them as well of how they what they thought was okay to do at that time.
Yeah, and they clarified they meant the artifacts that are spiritually important to the tribes.
Yeah, I'd say like my default would be yeah.
I would say it would depend, because to kind of Kieran's point of, it could be a slippery slope situation where a bunch of people are showing up. It depends on who the person is. Do they have a legitimate claim to it? Does the group have a legitimate claim to it? How did it come to the museum's possession? Right? Because then you could run to a scenario where their distant ancestors willingly gave this artifact over as some sort of whatever reason, right? And then it was to the state, and then the state preserved it. And so in that case, it's kind of like it becomes a gray area. Like, well, no, this was the part of it. Even it being here has significance because those people gave it to us.
I think when it comes to bones, there's a particular issue there. Like even the ancient Greeks, one of the worst punishments you could have for a crime was to not only be executed, but to have your body left in the street for the dogs to eat. So to not have a burial. And many cultures have that, like a serious thing about that. We had a situation, I think it was England, in a museum. They had the remains of a couple of indigenous people over there. And they negotiated with the local indigenous people to ship the bones back. And it was similar to like a military ceremony, where they send the body on a coffin and they send an escort with him, and they arrive and do a burial. It was really quite a moving thing to see that these people really were moved by having their ancestors returned so they could bury them properly. So I can see,
completely different context, right? They actually cared, right? So it's a completely different animal.